Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on behalf of the Park Avenue Armory, Tom Eccles, Hans Ulrich Obrist, and Avery Willis Hoffman, Program Director from the Armory. We'll welcome you to the first of the 7 curatorial talks that we're having each Saturday at 3 p.m. We're delighted to have today a brilliant young curator working in New York, Daniel S. Palmer, or Dan. Daniel is currently the new associate curator for the Public Art Fund. He was previously the Leon Levy assistant curator at the Jewish Museum, where he co-curated exhibitions like Unorthodox and Repetition and Difference. He has contributed to numerous exhibition catalogs and publications, among them Hopper's Drawing at the Whitney Museum or New York Paintings at the Kunstmuseum in Bonn. He has for numerous media, including Art News, Moose Magazine, Kaleidoscope, The Exhibitionist, and the Guernica, among others. And he's currently a doctoral candidate in art history at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he earned his Master of Philosophy degree in 2012, and also holds a Bachelor in Art History and English with highest honors from Rutgers University. So it's my pleasure to present Dan today. That's gonna tell us very interesting stories that connect to the show. It was very important for us to have young professionals that are working within the city and that can actually give a testimony of how important it is to analyze the work of Martin Creed and how important it is to think the complexity of being simple, as Martin puts it. So please give it up for Dan.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Umberto, and thank you all for being here today. So when I got an email inviting me to come and give a talk here for this exhibition, I was really kind of floored. Partly these kinds of things have been happening in my life, and it's this sort of like serendipity, this like, there's a Yiddish word for it, beshert, you know, it's like meant to be, destined. And it was totally one of those emails when I got Umberto's email, not only because the talk series is called the Whatever Series, and he said, basically, we want you to talk about whatever you want to in relationship to Martin Creed. So great, that's a perfect thing. I don't have to do like a formal written art historical, litany. But instead, I could sort of talk about it, how personally meaningful this exhibition, and especially Martin Creed's work, is to me. And the reason I say it was really destined, and it's really an immense honor and really very meaningful for me, is because, and I responded as such to Umberto, I've said for a while now, Martin Creed saved my life in Milan in 2006. And it's like this super cryptic like thing, like, wait a minute, were you drowning? And Martin like reached in and saved. And maybe it's potentially a little bit of an exaggeration, a little bit of an overstatement. But on some level, I really do feel that. And so that's maybe the thesis. And like I said, I'm really going to be talking from the heart, from the gut, which is, I think, how I've found it's most successful for me to speak, and most meaningful. And I really want to sort of share my personal connection, my deep-seated connection with Martin Creed's work, and especially with, like I said, maybe this one initial moment that I had with the work in 2006 in Milan. So that's maybe a sort of tall order, but let's start by just sort of setting the scene of Milan in 2006, where I was doing, it wasn't exactly like a study abroad kind of a thing, but I had received a travel grant from the university where I was studying, which was Rutgers University, the BizDac travel grant, which I should give them a lot of credit actually in this conversation as well. And the idea was for me to go to Milan for the summer and to study Italian furniture design. I was undertaking an art history degree and was really interested in the ways that sort of Memphis in the 80s and a lot of other important designers in Milan, really centered in Milan, were very significant for the course of design history. And that was something that I think at that point, in America, was relatively understudied. It's really obviously having a moment right now. So I was there, but there were a few problems, right? So I don't speak Italian is kind of the first potential problem there, and the second problem was, let's say, some of the figures in Memphis were less welcoming than other designers and other archivists and historians, and I was maybe having a little bit of a crisis, an existential crisis, and not just because I was also reading a lot of existential philosophy, but I was sort of very lonely and very kind of wandering and wondering and uncertain at that moment. Not just in terms of my studies and in terms of why I was there, but also I think I'll be very open and honest because I think Martin's work encourages that, and I'll say in general. I mean, I wasn't certain of whether the path I was on was the right one, whether I should even care to finish my university degree, do the next thing, who knows. And I was also sort of course, there's the sort of love aspect of it too, and alone for the summer, and someone's far away, and maybe that you have questions about that relationship. Maybe it's working towards an inevitable end, all those kinds of things. So I think wandering around, the square, the palazzo where the Duomo is there, as a foreigner is also really maybe not the most welcoming, especially when it's like this glorious thing and it's under construction. As you see in this photo, it was like a kind of like nothing was really living up to the expectations of what it was supposed to be. And then like one day I kind of, instead of looking directly at the Duomo, kind of turned to the side and noticed in large neon letters there, everything is going to be all right, which, I mean, look, if the best thing that art can be is like a hand reaching out, to the audience in a moment of questioning, a moment of need, a moment of where they need a connection, that was really, really special. Just to have that interaction alone really meant a lot to me. And from there then, I started to sort of, okay, well, let me see what is it with this building? Is this an advertisement? Is this a Bob Marley reference? Let's sort of explore and, wander over that way, because, I didn't have any archives to go to. And, really kind of understanding then a little bit more about, starting to have the realization, okay, maybe this is an artwork actually, just the way it's cited there is really very particular. And there actually weren't, from what I can remember, there weren't a lot of like descriptive text. There wasn't like a plaque, or maybe if there was, it was in Italian, and I didn't fully identify it. And then I kind of realized that, well, what you can do is you can actually sort of walk up the side stairs there and then up to the main level, and you walk into this kind of darkened room, and there was partly this feeling of like, oh wait, maybe I'm not supposed to be here, maybe of sort of starting from this place of questioning, of uncertainty, and then having these turbines, these like large wind movers blowing directly in your face, and seeing this large neon text there, small things, and this large stack of plywood. Oh wait, maybe they're constructing it. Maybe I'm here before it opens, or whatever, or they've just taken it down. Really, I think this sort of uncertainty kind of like fit with my headspace at that time in a great way. And then slam, right, with this piano absolutely slamming shut at that exact moment. The timing really could not have been more perfect. I realize now, seeing the work downstairs again, which is the first time I'd seen it since Milan, it's really quite a long interval, actually. I've been down there and sort of spent a whole moment exploring that part of the galleries without actually hearing it slam. And I realize now how serendipitous the timing actually was, because it was kind of like this jolt, and then obviously, and then the gallery space really sort of continued to wake up. To have something where this runner is sprinting past you, like bolting towards the exit, is not just a feeling of like uncertainty, but a feeling of, in some ways, almost like jarring you, of almost a horror. Wait, should I be running with him? Is there a problem? Is there somebody, something of dastardly, let's say, further ahead? And then, that was actually pretty good with the animation. And then having the main, absolutely gorgeous, long colonnaded hallway with, Martin's probably most seminal piece, with the lights going on and off there, was really quite, again, sort of disrupting and jarring. And all of this, and then sort of as you're exiting out, to have another moment that's extremely visceral, obviously, and powerful, and that can have, I think, for all of us, especially, for all of us and some of us especially have really sort of personal resonances of like a physical, bodily trauma, let's say, or a different kind of way of jarring us, not just conceptually, but really at our core, was a sort of really a jolting final note as you're sort of walking down the back stairs and making your way out to the exit. So with all of that, was my introduction to Martin Creed. And I think that I was really taken aback and decentered and sort of thrown off balance and off base a little bit. And I think that at that point in my life, I really had sort of had a much more traditional sort of art historical training, and to have the shift of something like that really, it threw me off balance, I think, in a really important and really productive way, although I didn't necessarily understand it at the moment. I understood that I had just seen something that, as I sort of got further in, understood was an exhibition and was by a single artist, and started to, I think, at one point realize, okay, this is an artist named Martin Creed, maybe, although I kind of basically filed it away. I wasn't sort of super like into. I love that the music is going. This makes me so happy right now. It really kind of like was just somewhere kicking around in my brain as a very meaningful experience in my art historical and eventually curatorial upbringing. And like I said, it really has stuck with me. To the point where, partly because it meant so much because of my moment of crisis, and it was partly reassuring, but also reassuring in a way that was additionally jolting in other ways, in other more sort of intellectual and eventually, became professional ways. And I thought that was really meaningful, and it really, like I said, stuck with me. But the way for something to become meaningful in that larger way, you have to eventually sort of follow up. You have to sort of have that experience then align with your bigger project, let's say, to use an interesting and funny word. And I think, the reason then I include in some of these other slides of other seminal works by Martin Creed is to kind of get at like why exactly that did its work on me. And I'll sort of talk about exactly what I think that is, what that means of the projects, the exhibition and the individual artworks being so successful, and what they've done for me personally, and maybe it's a little bit of an insight in terms of why I think they're so successful. But it really is, on one level, if I could kind of partly distill it, partly because of I guess I would almost call it like simple generosity. They're absolutely, even if they're potentially at times antagonistic, switching on and off the lights seems antagonistic, and Martin's talked about it as kind of like a disruptive gesture, but I think it's really, it's that, to take something like a sheet of paper and crumple it and have something that's like so simple and hits you at your core, that an individual can kind of get, a young individual can kind of understand in a really simplistic way, is really quite powerful. And then some of the slightly sort of more less well-known maybe of his projects helped me, I think, now that I'm seeing them, to have a little bit of a understanding of when I when we were talking at the dinner, I explained to him I sort of saw in his work as kind of like almost a curatorial sensibility to sort of change the way that that a viewer understands objects or space or themselves. I think is related to a sort of curatorial way of looking at the world, and not just curatorial in the sense of like choosing the way that, you know, a work like this is almost sort of taking the concept of a curator and sort of flipping it on its head in a almost antagonistic way of you know, taking all the work in a sculpture collection and bringing it out. But beyond that, that it's curatorial in the sense that there's an idea of like almost to care for, you know, I think is vaguely related to that concept of generosity, that idea that you're not just sort of highlighting and caring for and sort of bringing out and choosing and showing objects, like in this case with, you know, works in a collection, or all of, you know, an assortment of balls, or let's say, you know, cactuses that are sort of perfectly lined up in almost this meticulous kind of way, which I think on some level relates to my own. I mean, I was fidgeting with this, and now I realize it's perfectly knolled, you know, and everything else is exactly where it, as someone once said, everything has to be just so with you, Dan. But I think that beyond that, there really is a way of thinking about sharing these things and making them. Let's see, what would it be? Making them accessible and meaningful because of their differences, because of the way that they've been selected and brought together, as a way to always, and again, this I think really gets to a big part of it, always really consider the audience as fundamental to the conversation. And in a way, that's really where I personally felt that this artist, who I saw his work in Milan, wasn't just, you know, sort of, he wasn't just like proud of what he had done. Look, I created this perfect painting and I'm proud of it, and it goes off into the world, and it's sort of a sort of testament to an immense amount of skill or an immense amount of work or anything like that. I think in some ways, because of the simplicity of these gestures, and because of the way that they almost require something on the receiving end or an audience to complete them. You know, it's really the tree falling in the woods paradigm, that ultimately I realized that I was, in fact, you know, and this is again talking about that sort of hand art, you know, metaphor of art as a hand reaching out, that I was as fundamental to that process as the sort of, whatever we want to call it, the sort of spark of creativity, the sort of spark of genius that invented, you know, that came up with the concept in the first place. And you know, this then sort of, I think, loops into my own arc as a curator. I mean, to have gone, as I said, come initially from an art historical background, and really always assumed that that writing and teaching and academia was going to be my main interest. And the focus of my life's work, I have at some point, you know, not that long ago in the scheme of things, but really had a very meaningful shift towards understanding that if you create things, specifically in my case exhibitions, and opportunities for people to come to have their own opportunities to complete the sort of circle, and to bring and offer themselves to the work in whatever level that means, whether it's sort of very intense, sort of something that they've read every single thesis and every single book on this artist, and they know it on an extremely esoteric and high level and intellectual level. That can be one aspect of the dialogue, but then as much opening out to somebody who might not have ever heard of the artist's name, or somebody who might not necessarily even understand that what they're looking at is art. I've realized that that's an opportunity for profound transformation. That's an opportunity to, I mean, to get a little sort of maybe overly optimistic and hopeful. That's an opportunity to change the world. And I really fundamentally believe that because of the way that it can have ripple effects. And where, like I said, Martin Creed's show in 2006 really made me consider exhibition making in a way that I don't think that's necessarily, you know, he clearly doesn't consider himself like an artist curating exhibitions. You know, obviously here with this wonderful show at the Armory, at the Park Avenue Armory, there was a curatorial team, and you know, it was who really worked with him to curate the project, and his name is not listed as one of the curators of this exhibition. But like I said, it's a curatorial sensibility that I think is something that I've sort of taken to heart and understood as an opportunity to really to reach out to a myriad of different types of people, which is why I'm thrilled to be able to have a slide like this up right now, which is the wonderful work that my new organization that I'm honored to be a part of, Public Art Fund, did with Martin Creed just before I got there. So it was like this incredible, again, sort of serendipity, sort of really nice confluence to come into to start working with Nicholas and the rest of the team to really kind of be at the Public Art Fund at what I view as an absolutely critical moment for considering art and its publics. And I sort of maybe it's hard to kind of get it maybe over the microphone, but I'm adding an S at the end of that word, public, because there are many now more than ever, many different publics who are coming to art. Some of, and that's where I sort of talk about it maybe on a spectrum. Some who have read Artforum every single month and are super well versed in the ins and outs and the minutiae, intellectual maybe minutiae of the work. But there are other publics who, like I said, maybe this is the first time they're coming to an art project, and especially in this day and age, that's a really special opportunity to expand out. And I love the idea of Public Art Fund working with Martin Creed to create this, what is it, like, 7-foot tall red neon spinning sign that says understanding, because especially in a moment like right now where we have such societal difficulty, and what we need more than ever is something like more understanding. To offer this up as a gesture, the sort of spinning nature of it really is kind of partly confusing, but partly I think calls itself to attention. It almost reminds me a little bit of like an alarm, especially with that color sort of glowing in the night, and you see it from both the Brooklyn front and the waterfront and the Manhattan waterfront. It really is a gesture towards what I'm really especially interested in doing right now, and why I'm honored to be at the Public Art Fund, is to continue to open this conversation out to wider and wider publics because of the opportunities for real transformation. And then beyond that, I mean, Martin clearly has a history of working with Public Art Fund, and it's really nice because it sort of, again, then links his work back to an earlier project, back to, connects the Milan part of what I was just talking about to New York in the year 1999 and 2000, where he had a version of that Everything Is Going to Be All Right neon work installed in Times Square. And it was really, again, sort of serendipitous in some respects, where when I was, reviewing images and preparing some slides for this, I kind of had this flashback to like, oh wow, Y2K, remember that? Everyone remember Y2K? And everyone was freaking out, are all the computers gonna crash? Are planes gonna fall out of the sky? And it was like another moment where we kind of needed a sort of, work collectively as a society, the same way I think we really do right now, and perhaps always will in every moment, need a sort of just a simple gesture of compassion and of sort of kindness, the way I think we can say is really important in Martin's work, but in an intellectual and an intellectually aware way. I mean, this is not like a overly populist or almost propagandistic or overly simplistic way of thinking about kindness and generosity, to bring in that word that I mentioned before. And I think it's really, it was special that this work happened then, but I connected it to something, and this is maybe like a funnier little anecdote than the story I was telling about Milan, which is that when Y2K happened, for like the year 2000 New Year's, I was at when I was younger, we had sort of large family gatherings with all of our friends and other family for the New Year's, and the Y2K one was particularly sort of exciting, let's say, partly because it seemed like a big new dawn and everyone was talking about it, and we were in the sort of everyone was gathered in the main living room, watching the countdown on the television, and me and I think it was like 2 or 3 of my best childhood friends, Danny and Chad and me, and we all like snuck off to the other, like basically to this kind of like back room where we knew that there was another little TV that we could watch it sort of on our own, like the parents are over there, we're doing it on our own, and but we also knew that the circuit breaker was there, and so when the countdown happened, it was 10, 9, and 2, 1, Happy New Year, and we heard everyone celebrating and hugging and kissing and blowing, and then we waited like 10 seconds or so, and we flipped off the lights, and everyone started freaking out, and it was this moment, I think partly. Clearly, I had no idea who Martin Creed was at that point. If I really didn't, wasn't even introduced to him until like 2006 or so. But it was this like really, it made me, I think now looking back at it, I think it made me realize the power and opportunity for humor and meaning and I don't know, just playfulness sometimes, even if it sort of is gotten through a kind of I don't know what the right word is, but maybe slightly dastardly, if we can use that with a sort of smiling, winking kind of emoji after it, approach to changing environments and manipulating the way that people experience things. And then, of course, we turned the lights back on and we all popped in, gotcha, Happy New Year's, But it really, then to then start to get into flip through, right? To then eventually... like how many years later, learn about Martin Creed's work. And I have to say, when I first found out about this piece and was, studying about Martin Creed in the years just after seeing that Trussardi exhibition, I didn't really of course, make the connection to my own, personal anecdote that related. It was only when, in the sort of materials announced for this exhibition and in some of the interviews that he talked about that, he had, a similar situation as a child of this kind of playfulness and, sort of being a little bit disruptive, where his parents would be in the bathroom, and there was a light switch on the outside of the bathroom, and so he would flip the lights on and off as a way to kind of to mess with them a little bit. So I really feel like there's something about this piece that resonated with me, that this piece and a lot of other pieces that resonated with me, not just in my immediate interaction with it, an immediate sort of discovery of the piece, either sort of conceptually of reading about it in a text and then eventually experiencing it. But what I'm trying to say here, I think, is that there are various levels for a lot of Martin's work that I find so powerful and meaningful, in the way that the best experiences with artworks are not just intellectual, but also physical. They're not just physical, but they sort of resonate over years, that, you can learn, so you can discover something, whether it's a fact or a experience, years down the line, that makes you look at something that you'd seen previously, an artwork in a totally different light. And then again, the idea of these kinds of artworks is almost like being like old friends. One of the things that's meant the most to me, not just about this show, but about getting to have devoted my life to seeing and looking at and thinking about and sharing art, is that it really it keeps it keeps giving. The more you go back to it, and the more you sort of have this repeat visit, or the more you sort of see this friend at a different venue on the other side of the world, that this can be really expansive and, again, generous in a different kind of way. The same way, you know, a smile from a friend you haven't seen in 10 years or something like that, and like reconnecting with them, you know, after you've been away, can be really really powerful, but also help you understand other things about them as you've grown and matured and had other different experiences. So I have a few other slides that I think maybe sort of help to emphasize a little bit of what I was also saying of Martin's, what I would sort of talk about as almost like a curatorial or maybe a sort of architectural or spatial sensibility. These ideas, and these are maybe some of the earlier sort of more, some of them are slightly more rare works that aren't as frequently illustrated or that aren't necessarily included in the exhibition, but I thought that it was important to bring them into my conversation about, you know, why this work especially resonates with me and has helped me to think differently about my practice and the way I think about not only exhibition making, but also sharing art and that interaction between artist and, especially the collaboration between artist and curator, and then thinking about audience. But especially here, there's some images that are really about the built environment and the way that that Martin's work has sort of, you know, not exactly manipulated it, but really sort of provided these small little interventions, these really important, very sometimes minimal gestures that have a really powerful, powerful meaning. So I mean, to take, you know, these sort of two silver-plated brass and gold-plated brass objects, one that sort of is convex and the other is concave, to have them as intrusions and protrusions from a wall, immediately sort of makes you think about the space in a different way. I mean, I think one of the most powerful gestures that happens downstairs is in the drill hall, first of all, to take that enormous space and not have, you know, a million objects in there and things blinking all around and moving all around, but just to have a single screen that you're kind of like in awe of, you're looking up at, really kind of shifts it really is like a kinesthetic experience then. It's really very much about the body and your experience in that space in an almost like an optical way. I mean, I've given a lot of thought previously to murals and to scale of works, and I think that that's really a significant gesture downstairs. And the same way, you know, an early work like this is clearly sort of a foreshadowing of that kind of dynamic between a physical space and the body's perceptual relationship to it, but then also of like opening this roll gate at the end of each of the films is really likewise a gesture that is about kind of shift, again, sort of like allowing for a shifting of gears, allowing for an opening up of what exactly the exhibition, the bounds, let's say, of the exhibition are. And I think, you know, the way that earlier works, like a sort of doorstop fixed to only allow a door to open 45 degrees, really is like a frustration of our typical understanding of how a door works, and you know, as much, which there's a version of it downstairs, but of a door opening and closing on its own. Again, we talked about the lights and, you know, things like the curtains. This is, I think, about a really meaningful way of just making us look at the world differently. And I think that's really so much, that's like for me, I'll say, that's the absolute ideal of what successful art and successful exhibition making and successful ideas can be about. And then I think especially beyond that, to consider ways to then open this up and sort of to go back to my own trajectory and to say that when in a moment that like we live in right now, when more people are coming to art than ever before, really. And it's not just because of social media and people Instagramming things. It's not just because, you know, of the sort of role of art in society, which I think is sort of on the rise. Which I think is an absolutely wonderful thing. I think it's at that point really special to have an outlook of how we can make this the most meaningful and positive and open and life-changing experience. And I really feel like Martin's works partly are, like I keep saying, they're partly challenging. When you are walking around a village or a small, or a street, or I think like with something like the Olympics, hearing these bells going again and again and again, for a set duration, there's a disruptive gesture there. It's not the status quo. It's not life as we normally know it, and that is a place where being sort of thrown off kilter a little bit is a place for real for real transformation and growth to happen. And I think that that's one of the most most meaningful things about Martin Creed's work for me. And then again, to sort of, and this is just such a wonderful piece that like absolutely floored me when I first saw it, that I just thought it was really important to bring in. And I do think it relates to what I was just talking about, because of the way then that, again, we're talking about not just like the esoteric gallery space, of like a white wall gallery where people, which has like, it either has oftentimes financial boundaries and restrictions. Like for me, any this is a little bit of like a political statement, but any bar of entry, be it a ticket price or a suggested donation or like anything like that, is a bar far too high. Even if there are some gestures towards like free Fridays or something like that, I think that's meaningful. But I think we need to be thinking, especially in this moment, about ways to open the conversation up as widely as possible and to provide opportunities for everyone to come to it. And then I was talking about financial bars and restrictions right there, but I'm also talking about maybe restrictions that are a little bit more conceptual of like of people not necessarily feeling welcome in a place. If there's a sort of like snarky gallery attendant at the front door who's kind of like giving you a look like you don't belong in the place, that's really not what I think we need right now. Where if somebody's like made the effort to come from whatever outer borough, whatever sort of faraway place to see or experience that thing, we need to be trying to provide more ways to not only bring people to places where art is being shared, but to then also like provide meaningful gestures that show these people as well, that because of the whole sort of flattening maybe of center periphery, that their sites, their places of meaning are also places that merit these kinds of important gestures and opportunities for them to have beauty and meaning there as well, and to encourage, especially as a way to encourage people in everywhere in the world. That's really big, right? To be able to themselves create and offer things that they find meaningful to not only their our own communities, but to everyone. And I think with things like that, there's really opportunities for profound transformation, for profound growth, for really us to seize this this opportunity, and that's really like the good word for it. And I think just to sort of maybe end with a slide that shows clearly one of the most like let's say ebullient and ecstatic and positive moments in not only the show here, downstairs, but maybe in contemporary art today. This work is one where I don't think it's possible to walk in there and kind of like with a frown and not not leave with at least a little bit of a smile. And like there's this look that when you walk around downstairs and whenever you see somebody encountering a work by Martin Creed and there's a lot of other artists who are doing this too. I know we're sort of very much focused on Martin's work right now and its relationship to me and my vision for curating and for how I experience the world, but I want to just make sure I say that like there's a lot of other really important and not so important, let's say, artists in terms of the sort of hierarchy of, art history and the canon and whatever. But just basically, there's a lot of people who, and I say now, I'm clearly expanding this out beyond just a sort of conversation about fine art. But there's a lot of approaches to living, approaches to existence that are about generosity and about sharing and about encouraging that kind of really subtle little smile that people have on their face downstairs. That's about improving the world. Maybe again, that's really sort of big, but I think that that's what we have to aspire to. We have to shoot really, really high, aim really high, and without doubt, we'll succeed. Really, we'll succeed because for me, like the smallest little smile, the smallest little personal, transformation has ripple effects. And that's why I really feel like my experiences, before I knew who Martin Creed was and before I knew, what his work was really about, my experiences at that exhibition have maybe I shouldn't have even just said changed my life, or saved my life, but I really should have said because it's what I do believe, it's how we can save the world and improve the world, which I think is as important now as ever. So. Thank you for your patience with this. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Alberto.
I have a couple of questions for you, and after that, we're gonna open the questions to you guys. It's very interesting for me that you brought up the word gestures, because that's something that I'm personally very interested in, and that I've studied before. And I think that it's increasingly difficult for us to notice the importance of these kind of like small, tiny actions in the everyday life. I was touring the show with a group of collectors like 2 weeks ago, and actually one of them asked me, so what is it that's so special about the lights going on and off? With this kind of like skepticism. And I think that Martin's work generates that skepticism as part of like his artistic strategy, maybe one can say that. But I'm curious to know, like, how do you react to this inherent problem that Martin's work poses to like audience and like the public, in which we have like this moment of doubt about like the materials or like the actual dynamic of the work, or like how cryptic it is sometimes. Like, how do you like personally react to that? And also as being part of like the public art fund, which actually like is devoted to the public, how do you personally like deal with that or like mediate the work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to start to respond to that question by saying that I don't come from the New York art world, and I know a lot of us in the art world, one of the art worlds, let's say, now really are sort of from that position as well. But like, I think the fact that I grew up in rural northwestern Connecticut, and that my father's a mechanical engineer and my mother's a social worker, and I didn't sort of like grow up with a familiarity to what art is, other than this is something meaningful, this is something special. My parents would take me into museums and understood that this was like an important way to enrich my world and my worldview. That I think that's really fundamental to like my position, my approach, and I think that's why maybe I'm always hyper aware. I'm very conscious of that dynamic that you were just talking about. That dynamic that explaining something to my parents, or explaining something to, somebody who, like I said, maybe has never come to art before, is an amazing opportunity. But on that level, the sort of oft-heard retort to a sort of very simple gesture, be it a Pollock painting or the lights going on and off, is, well, my 3-year-old could have done that. I think at that point, it's very important not to sort of take that as like a rejection, a shutdown, like an end of conversation of, oh, this person doesn't get it, they don't know the like long lineage, they don't know the history, they don't, they're not willing to kind of be in the world of art where a gesture like that can really kind of have a immense significance. I think that when faced with that kind of question, it's not that the person asking it is not asking it in a necessarily negative, antagonistic, sort of wrong-minded kind of way, but is asking it in a way, in exactly that kind of questioning, that existential questioning, that is an opportunity. That's like the exact moment, the exact location where real growth and change can happen. And that's where, like, I mean, clearly you can tell I'm excited. Let's talk. Like, I always am so excited when that happens, and it's like that's where I want to like get in there and really share with that person why I view this as an important gesture. Why, for me, this is so powerful. This is so meaningful because of either things it's referencing or how it fits in art history. And really, I find that as an incredible opportunity to share and to maybe provide some information for that person to maybe have some growth and transformation there. So I think that's where this is especially powerful and meaningful. And I think beyond that, maybe to answer a part of your question a little bit more directly, like I think I'm absolutely floored in Martin's work with the sort of like Zen-like simplicity that his work really, in terms of conceptually, that it embodies. It's like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? I mean, it's that simple, and it's like with the absolutely like the minimal. The most minimal gesture, the sort of simplest effort. Maybe with the simplest gesture. I guess again to use your word, real meaning can be conveyed. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just remember how Martin explains the balloon piece, and he says that it's actually shortening the space between bodies. Mm-hmm. So, despite of being a highly conceptual work and have, for example, instructions or very precise mathematical calculations to fill the actual, half of the actual space.
You must have had a lot to do with that. Exactly. You must have had a lot to deal with those instructions.
It also has like a very poetic side, and I think that's what's really interesting about Martin production, how you can actually enter the work through different entry points. Yeah. I'm thinking...
No, I was just going to say, like, to have had now the opportunity to get to explain things that I'm like so excited about and invested into my father, to explain that work to him downstairs, he would be kind of like fascinated to know about the mechanism that actually turns the lights on and off, And I think that's like, again, not just, like a shutting down of, no, it's about this. You have to understand it this way. That's like about what I'm saying I also love about, Martin Creed's work is that there are a million different ways to view it.
Yeah, and also thinking about just like anxiety or fear or all these kind of like...
It's my mother's view of it,
Yeah, all these kind of like experiences that you can have within the balloon room or within like the lights going on and off. That's yet another like entry point.
Absolutely.
I don't know if any of you guys have any questions. Sure, you want to say something?
Yeah, John.
So actually, two. Thank you. So I was so impressed at the way you talked about your initial experience of seeing his work in 2006, which is 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Obviously,
that's the other thing. Exactly. It's just 10
and you were
years
quite
ago.
young at the time.
Yeah.
So I guess I have two. So, had you never heard of Martin Creed before, A? And B, was this the first time you ever saw any kind of performance art kind of thing? Because the way you talked about it, it sounded so revelatory as an experience. And I was wondering if, in fact, it was the profundity of that initial experience, or if it was the particularity of Creed's work itself that gave you that. And then then the second part, to follow up on Umberto's first question, which I think is really relevant, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I feel that listening to you, because it's been so great to hear the kind of tenderness and authenticity of the emotion that you're expressing. I had just assumed that Martin Creed's work, given his contemporaries, was more cynical and ironic in a kind of provocative way. And suddenly I'm thinking, wow, I actually didn't see it that way. And the way you're talking about it, just to compare artists, it sounds to me more like the sensibility of an artist, let's say like Michael Asher, like getting you to see your world, as opposed to a kind of biting twist that we associate with, let's say, the generation of a lot of English artists of Creed's contemporaries, Damien Hirst or the Coons and this. So it's really interesting. I didn't know that kind of authenticity was even in the mix. So anyway, it's really that's
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think on the first side of it, no, I mean I was definitely I think relatively well versed in contemporary art practices. I mean, of course, I'd come. I was in school in New Jersey, and I would take the train in often, and go around galleries and see performances and see things that now I kind of like know very specifically what they were. But it was a process of sort of learning and discovering at that point. And like I said, when my parents were taking me into exhibitions when I was younger, I mean, like they were taking me into very, without necessarily maybe knowing it, to very important exhibitions. I mean, I was like coming into the 1993 Whitney Biennial and coming into like really sort of, it was always things at MoMA that were of that, around that moment from like the 90s to 2000s. But I think a part of it is that, like I said, I was very much coming from an art historical background at that point, so I didn't maybe know like the minutia of who exactly Martin Creed was. Perhaps I had heard his name before, and maybe I, knew a little bit generally of like what was going on in art in the UK around these decades, but it was something about, and it's a nice transition to have the second part of the question there. It was something about, maybe just the way it was resonating with me at that moment, that was so profound and transformative. I mean, the way that, like, look, with anything, it's not to say that any of the other artists you listed or any of the other artists who are, working in similar ways, or, for example, like, any record is better or worse than any other record in any objective way. It's, as far as I view these kinds of things, it's about how it resonates with you, with that individual person. And there was something just about that show and about Martin's work since, and every of me coming to it every time, where it clearly is like, maybe this is good. This is musical metaphors. I'm sure Martin would love this. The tuning fork, like it's really working on my level. It's really resonating on my level and on my pitch or tone, or I don't know, the music metaphor. I better stop with the music metaphors. I really don't know what I'm talking about. But it really resonates with me personally. And maybe again, then, this talk about my very particular, view of Martin's work is coming from me and who I am. And maybe it's partly that I'm an optimist, maybe to a fault, perhaps. But that this is my read on this work, and perhaps there's somebody else who maybe in the rest of this great series of talks who or other writing and thinking about and sharing about Martin's work who will have the exact opposite view of it and really talk from a cynical point of view about how it's all about the world going to hell and how it's all, and I think maybe the optimist would see that as a total compliment to the work, that look, yeah, it's so expansive that maybe it can be a place where both views can inhabit at the same time. Even, you can view understanding as the single most positive, optimistic, thing for us to have in the world, right now, this sculpture and this concept and idea, or it can be a challenge and a disruption and a sort of like negative view potentially. Clearly there's only one way I can see it. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Another great person. Okay. So I think we're gonna wrap. Thank you all for being here. Whatever the series of talks is going to happen every Saturday throughout the summer at 3 p.m. Daniel Espalmer here and Humberto Moro, assistant curator for the show. We're very happy to respond more questions if you have them individually after this. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Oliver. That was really good.